path and the XML query. So XML markup language is the language for business-to-business communication. As a matter of fact, in the last 2 weeks, I've wound up doing 2 or 3 things with XML that I had not previously ever, just encountered it in the real world. Well, I wrote an XML application to do an online quiz, and when I decided to do podcasting of my lectures, I had to get the XML format to broadcast, because you publish your podcast in an XML file. So it's like I encountered XML in the real world, which I don't always do. It was twice in the last week encountered. XML is not a replacement for HTML. We had a question about that in the question forums online. XML and HTML were designed for two completely different purposes. That's not that. XML, HTML was designed purely to display things. So it is it's a computer-to-person kind of thing. You design a pretty page, someone looks at it, they say, ooh, it's a purely aesthetic medium. Whereas XML is designed purely to hold data. You can make XML look pretty if you want to, but that's not its primary purpose. The primary purpose is structuring data to make it much more useful for programs to access the data and somehow incorporate it in some programming task. So XML is not a replacement for HTML. There was a time when XML first came out that they thought that XML would actually, all web pages would eventually be written in XML, and you'd use style sheets, transform them into something pretty. Well, I can tell you I've used style sheets to transform an XML document into something pretty for HTML, and it is a pain. It's not what XML was designed for. And so and I'll show you how to do it, but in this class, but using XML to make a pretty web page for someone to look at is not a good use for XML. And you can do it if you have to, but it's not a good use for XML. So instead, XML is a good source if you have data that you want to store or you want to give to someone else. You've got a program that has persistent data that you want to store on the computer. You can write it in XML, because then you might be able to reuse it down the line, as opposed to just in a comma-delimited file. Yes? XML is definitely better for platform. Well, not better than HTML for platform independence, but it's better than other data formats for storing data. It can be a lot slower. So XML doesn't do anything. XML is not a program. It is just a way of structuring data. So this is my first very exciting example. It's a note. It's got a to, a from, a heading, and a body. So this would be like you were storing an email message. You could store it in this kind of format, because it's got to, but the to would have to be an email address. From, a heading, which would be your subject, and don't forget the meeting on Friday. There's nothing magic about these tags. They're made up. That's the advantage of XML, and the disadvantage of XML is you can make up a set of tags that will exactly structure and replicate how you're storing your data. It's an advantage because then you can store any kind of data. It's a disadvantage because when you can make up your own set of tags to store data, someone else can make up their own set of tags to store data. So you have a standardization problem. And there are methods of getting around that, but it requires effort. So the basic uses for XML. You can keep data separate from your XML pages. So you could actually have an HTML page and import some data into the middle of it using XML. So you can store data inside HTML documents. XML can be used to exchange data, and that's one of the big uses we will be talking about XML for in this class, because web services and then service-oriented architecture, the primary way of exchanging data between the services is using XML. XML and B2B, and again, that's service-oriented architecture and web services. Data between businesses is now being exchanged in XML in a large volume. XML can be used to store data. It is better if you're storing data on some persistent media for like later archival use. It's good to store it in XML as opposed to in some database, because database vendors go out of business. And if a database vendor goes out of business and you no longer have a copy of their database software, you will never be able to get the data out of some archived database file, because it's in some weird proprietary format, structured in God knows how. There's more data lost on computers because you no longer have the program that's designed to read it. So if you store your data in a XML file, which is just a text file, that should be able to be read by any computer as long as you have a computer that can read whatever it is you stored data on. That's another problem. It will improve the longevity of your data storage. To make your data more useful, so since it's hardware independent, software independent, it has the same benefits as the service-oriented architecture and the web services. Is you can send an XML document created on a Mac to a Unix machine to a PC, to anywhere in the world. It's just text, so everybody can read text. XML can be used to create new languages. The wireless markup language is one example of a standardized language that's been created to support in XML. So wireless markup language is a language that's designed to mark up a document for transmission to somebody that holds a wireless device. So it's a smaller subset of markup that is more compatible with most wireless devices than standard HTML. There are a number of other markup languages. For instance, e-business markup language. There's a language specifically to mark up business data. So if you're going to be exchanging business data, there's a financial markup languages. Banks have their own markup language. So if you're exchanging financial data, you would probably want to use a standardized markup language to exchange the data with other people, because everybody then would be agreeing on the format for the XML file. So you have this XML, which allows you to create your own set of tags, but then you have organizations that are creating sets of tags that are standardized for a particular industry. So this is like my little picture. I stole it from somewhere. So you have an XML file, products.xml. You have a style sheet, which we'll talk about later. That style sheet can actually then make it look pretty, and you can pass it to a workstation, a pocket PC, a laptop. And how it displays could actually vary depending on what type of device it's being sent to. So when you're talking XML, XML actually has a lot of parts. You have your basic XML document, which is storing the data. But then you also have something, either a document type definition or a schema, an XML schema, which defines what the XML document actually looks like, what tags are available in that XML document. So it describes the valid tags for a particular document that you're sending across the internet. Something called XML path language, which is a way of locating a particular item within an XML page. So any specific node or element in the XML page you can locate with XPath. You can get a whole set of nodes from an XML document using XPath. Extensible Style Sheet Language Transformation, or XSLT, is a means of either displaying an XML document. You can convert an XML document to HTML so a browser can look at it and it will look pretty. You can also, more important for business, convert an XML document into another XML format. So you have an XML document that conforms to your own internal standards, and you're going to send it over the web. You can actually use an extensible style sheet language transformation file to transform that into, let's say, an industry standard XML format. So you can actually change the tags to fit whoever you're sending it to. And then XML query language is a way of querying multiple XML documents and extracting data. Well, there's also something called XML Linking Language. which is designed to actually provide links between XML documents, and that's as far as I'm going to go on XML Linking Language. So there's this picture that I got off of, you can't even see it because it's too small, but it says you've got an XML document. The DTD describes an XML document. An XML schema document also describes an XML document. The schema is the new one, and it's a much richer way of describing an XML document, so it actually supersedes a DTD. DTDs are circa 1990s, and schemas are more 2003 and on. Then you have XQuery uses the schemas, XPath uses, XQuery uses XPath, XSLT uses XPath, and all of this XQuery searches, XPath searches, and XSLT transforms. So they're all different kinds of documents that are designed, different kinds of standards that are designed to make working with an XML document easier. So this is my simple example.